Yesterday I had puppets in class. Today I'd like to introduce you to a long-eared horse that says hee-haw to remind you of our conversation yesterday about truth and rhetoric. This is actually a Haitian sculpture that I bought in, I think it was Lacaille, Haiti. Um, but the long-eared horse, the horse that looks surprisingly like a donkey, should remind you of Socrates' argument about the relationship between truth and rhetoric. Another way to say that is to ask the question this way. Do you have to be a good person in order to be a good speaker? Now, Plato, when he uses Socrates as a kind of puppet, and I do want to introduce you to a different puppet than I had in class yesterday, because this puppet doesn't have red hair and so won't be confused with anybody in our class. But when Plato has Socrates think about this, he does so in a way that suggests or argues actually that in order to be a good communicator, a good rhetor, you have to be an ethical person, a good and virtuous and even a wise and philosophical person. Do you agree with Plato on that? Let me suggest two instances of rhetoric in the 20th century that might put Plato's claim into question. So first of all, Winston Churchill, one of the most effective communicators of the 20th century, uh, by many accounts was a good and virtuous and wise and even philosophical person. But at the same time, just a few countries away was another very effective, skilled orator who was not a good and virtuous and wise and philosophical person, and that was Adolf Hitler. So what do we make of Plato's insistence through his puppet Socrates that in order to be a good communicator you have to be a good person, a truthful person? That may be something that you want to put into question. Now, for today's reading, you actually have, or for the reading due tomorrow, I should say, you actually have another puppet showing up. Does this look like the king of Egypt? I don't know if it does or not, but we're going to say that this is the king of Egypt. And the king of Egypt is actually worried about a late-breaking technology, 2,400 years old at least, of the pen. Didn't look very much like this in that day. But the king of Egypt in Socrates' story, I'm actually running out of hands here for all my puppets, so I'll maybe have to put the pen in my mouth or something and talk around it. But the king of Egypt in the story by Socrates, Thamus is his name, he's worried that if we use the pen, if we use writing to communicate, it will diminish our relationship. It will affect the ethical quality of our lives together. It's a little funny to think about this, but if you give it a little bit of thought as our assignment for tonight asks you to do, you'll realize that Plato, his anxiety about writing, apparently, is very similar to the anxiety we have about 13-year-olds playing video games all the time, or 23-year-olds playing video games all the time, or using Pinterest more than they use face-to-face. So as you think about what the king of Egypt has to say in the story that Socrates tells, I encourage you to notice the ways that Plato anticipates the sorts of things that we worry about in regards to our 5-year-olds carrying cell phones around, or our 13-year-olds doing a sundry media platforms. And I encourage you to recognize that the kind of anxieties that show up in Plato's Phaedrus are the same sorts of worries that we carry today. There is a little bit of a paradox in my assigning you a book about worrying about books. That is, I'm asking you to read something that worries about the ethical implications of reading. But that's the sort of thing you're used to in this class by now. Talk to you soon.